You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Break Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Garden, as always, and I'm absolutely thrilled to kick off today's episode. We've got an incredible guest in the house and a friend from the past who's broken himself on purpose and undergone an extraordinary journey of reinvention. But before we dive into that conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share our podcast with your friends and family. We've got a lot of inspiration coming your way. So audience, let me set the stage for you. Sean Sweeney and I go way back. We went to grade school together. We attended high school together. We shared memories, and then life took us on our separate paths. For over 25 years, we didn't cross our paths at all. Until one day, as I'm scrolling Twitter, I see an intriguing post from Sean, and that caught my eye. He'd reinvented himself multiple times, and that got me thinking, what led him down this transformational road? So today, many people know Sean as a successful real estate developer and Twitter influencer. More on that later. He loves that word. But we're not delving into real estate today. Today, we're talking about how he went from 23-year-old actor to 27-year-old receptionist to then becoming a big real estate developer based in Minneapolis with over a $200 million portfolio. And I'll give you a hint as to how he did it. He overcame the same mental roadblocks and hurdles that hold many of us back from realizing what our true purpose is. You can check out more what Sean's all about by following him on Twitter. He is at Sean, S-E-A-N-D Sweeney, S-W-E-E-N-E-Y, and checking out his Substack called The Bright Build, which is a weekly design-driven and community-focused newsletter mapping out the moves and mindset that are crucial for both the seasoned and aspiring real estate developer. I hope you enjoy this episode with my friend, Sean Sweeney.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
Sean Sweeney, welcome to the Break Podcast. How are you, sir?
Mike, great to see you. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
We were talking, this is for the audience. Sean and I have a history together. We went to high school together, grew up a little bit together. I was good friends with Sean's younger brother. Have not spoken to each other at all for 25 years or so until Sean pops up in my Twitter feed talking about how he has reinvented himself many times. And that just piqued my interest. And so I wanted to have Sean on. He's a successful real estate developer, but we're really not going to talk too much about real estate. We're going to talk about career reinvention and getting over those mental blockers and hurdles. And I can't think of a better guy to talk to about that. So Sean, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm flattered to be asked. And I felt the same way when you popped up on my screen. I'm like, wow, I haven't seen Mike in a really long time, but no, It's great to reconnect for sure.
It's amazing. So, all right, I want to ground the conversation in something pretty foundational that just to start, to try to set the tone for people. I read a lot of your tweets and a lot of your content recently in doing some of the prep work for this, but it's one of the things that stood out to me was my driving force has always been to change the course of my kids' future, both financially and mental health wise, get wealthy, be able to overcome things and, kind of be the best versions of themselves. I feel like that's my mission as well. And I wanted to just connect our conversation around that. I feel like I do this podcast because I'm trying to figure out what I need, the skills I need to teach my kids, my three boys, so that they are resilient and happy and are able to do what they want to do into the future. Why is that such an important thing for you?
No, it's a great question. It's important because I didn't realize I didn't have it for a long time. Growing up where we did, growing up in Madison, in the, frankly, I'm a little older than you, but in the 80s for the most part, and early 90s, times were a little different. And, you could have two parents that had basic jobs, and you could afford a small house in Madison, and you could scrape enough money together to play hockey and do things like that. And I didn't realize again until I was an adult how we kind of barely scraped by for a long time. And that's certainly no disrespect to my parents. No, they're wonderful people. They both had they just had different life outlooks and different visions, and that was great. And I didn't know any different. And I remember my dad was a lawyer for the state of Wisconsin for a long time. So I thought lawyers went to work at 9 and came home at 5 and played baseball with their kids in the backyard for 3 hours. And that was the life. And, it wasn't until 7th grade, 8th grade, starting at Edgewood, where friends would come over and they'd say, "Isn't your dad a lawyer?" I'd say, "Yeah." "Why's your house so small?"
Interesting.
And, you got into car, then you got to be 16 and like all of a sudden, like all your friends had like really nice cars and you're like, "Wait a minute, I don't even have a car." And, those things started to happen. I ended up for college having to pay for it myself. My parents unfortunately had split up a few years before. And, I was, my dream had always been to get out of Madison. I loved growing up there, great spot. Sure. But, I mean, you grow up in the same place for a long time and you want to go see other things. And I really had, wanted to go out to the East Coast, or, my dream school was Michigan. I really wanted to go there. And, you realize, unfortunately, at a very early age for me, that like going to school there would have meant $200,000 in debt. I didn't, and I was one of those kids when I went off to school, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I mean, I didn't have any sense of like I didn't really know what was out there. I thought I was going to play second base for the Cubs until I was about 16. So that was a rude awakening when I realized, wait a minute, that's probably not going to happen. Learning that lesson early about like, wow, if I was in a different financial situation, I could have gone to a different school. And I was really fortunate. I got a scholarship to Madison. So I was able to go there and, worked frankly 30, 40 hours a week during school for a lot of the time at, State Street Brats and other places, to pay for my apartment, to get food. And I ate a lot of brats, those years, but, it started to dawn on me at that time, the difference in, just income levels for various people. I had a bunch of friends who were at Madison as well, and they never worked, right? They went to class, they had fun, they did fun stuff. I remember working at Brats every Halloween when everybody else was out having a good time. And it dawned on me kind of at that age that like, wow, I know that money's not everything, but boy, it'd sure be nice to have some. Be nice to, just for not for showy reasons or anything other than just for flexibility in life, to be able to make choices based on what you want to do or what you hope you can do or what you aspire to do, not just what you have to do given your financial constraints. So that was a huge eye opener for me. And early in my, late teens and early 20s, making money became a force. I mean, a driving force for me. 25 years later, I look back and, life is better with it than without it. Certainly, certainly doesn't make you happy, I've learned, but it's been nicer. It's been a really, really nice life change for me to be able to do things in the world that I want to do, not as much that I had to, that I have to do for a certain reason. And so, now having two daughters and thinking about their future, wanting, my goal has always kind of been not to give them that same experience, for them to be able to go to whatever college they want, if they want to go to college, and to be able to take care of that for them. And, the other thing that dawned on me in my early 20s was there's only certain careers that make money, fair or unfair. I mean, it's changing obviously now with the internet and some things, but, back then in the mid 90s, early 2000s, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you could be a businessman, you could do, and there's a bunch of them, but that was kind of the take. And I always thought like, what if I wanted to be an artist? Or what if I wanted to be a school teacher? Like I was pretty much condemning myself to a life of near poverty and, not wanting to continue down that road. So for my children, it's super important to me. If one of my girls says, "Dad, I want to be a teacher," I want to be able to say, "You know what? That's fantastic. Go be the best teacher you can." But also be able to help them if they want to own a home and have a family and live in a safe neighborhood. So that's the financial piece, certainly, just through experience. And then the mental health stuff, it's a little touchy to talk about sometimes. And it's again, no one's fault. I think I've learned at this age, it's, there's so much stuff passed down generation to generation. And, nobody in the 1930s went to therapy to get their stuff worked on. Right. It was, I mean, it didn't even happen in the 70s and 80s when our parents were raising kids. But, my mom coming from Israel, her family coming from Yemen, they saw and lived through very horrific things. And, at the time, I didn't know it as a kid, but I think my mom struggled with a lot of that. Again, I don't think any fault of her own, other than just, inheriting that DNA and inheriting those life experiences through her family. And it led her to have a difficult life at times. She struggled with various things, and, it unfortunately, again, just got kind of passed to us through no one's faults. And again, as a young kid in Madison playing little league and hockey and stuff, you don't think about it, or you don't realize it. But as you get older, you start to realize, why am I struggling with this, or why am I doing this all the time? Or and for me, realizing that there was some trauma and some PTSD and some generational stuff that was passed on. It took me most of my 20s really struggling out in the world to really have to say to myself, wow, something's going on, and I need to figure out what's going on and how to get clear on this, or how to work through this. So that's been another big thing for me, is kind of feeling like, and my wife is the same way. We kind of have kind of drawn this line in the sand, and we're like, it stops with us.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to stop here, and we're going to do whatever kind of hard work we have to do, in therapy, emotionally, in tough conversations, whatever that has to be. It's not getting passed on. And honestly, Mike, some of it will probably, right? I mean, it's probably impossible to say that none of it's going to go on.
Yeah.
But trying to do things as, really differently to hopefully give our daughters a different experience in the world. And again, I say that not in a blaming way to my parents, to their parents, anybody. It just, I think we're all learning that now in this day and age of like how that stuff works. And, nobody knew that 30 years ago.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think why I wanted to start with that question was because I think it's going to set the conversation up. And I think it's going to give our audience a window into some of the things that you have done throughout your career and the changes that you have made and decisions you have made, kind of living with that foundation there. So with that, let's start the journey a little bit. And I didn't really even realize this recently, but you kind of described how you didn't know what you wanted to do in college. I feel the same way. I describe myself as the kid who never knew what he wanted to do when he grew up, and I still don't. But you went and tried to be an actor at around 20 years old. You said you'd give it 3 years. How did you decide on 3 years, and why acting?
It was, I mean, if I'm being honest, it was I didn't know what I wanted to do. And hey, doing that sounded way more fun than going to work in an office building or doing something like that. And I was always, in hindsight, I kind of regret it, but I always wanted to do theater. I always wanted to do plays in high school. And I remember our teacher would always ask me to do them. And I was too cool though. I couldn't go. I couldn't go be in the theater department. No way. But secretly, Mike, I wish I would have. I really wanted to. And I just unfortunately didn't have the self-confidence at that point to be able to say, yeah, you know what? I play hockey and baseball and soccer, and I'm also in the theater club. But, so once I was in college, I actually went to my junior year. There was a producer who had gone to Wisconsin who came back, and there was a directed study program for senior year. Like they basically were putting on 4 movies, and they were going to show them in the Wisconsin Film Festival. And it was, you're going to learn about being a producer and a director and kind of all the parts that go into making a movie. And long story short, I had a couple of girls that I liked who were like, hey, we're going to these auditions to try to be an actor, to try to be one of the actors. And I was like, hey, I should just tag along, just mainly because I wanted to hang out with them longer. And I went with them, and then we're standing there in line, and they asked me the person there asked me if I was there to audition. I said, sure. And I went in and actually, I had no idea what I was doing. And I went in there, they made me read something, and I kind of laughed and read it and then left and, followed the girls home or wherever we were going. And 2 days later, I get an email that said, "You've been given the role of Brent in the one of the movies." And I looked it up and I was like, I got one of the lead roles in one of the movies.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, what? And I ended up doing it. And then I decided I should probably take a theater, senior year. I was like, what's an easy class I can take to keep my scholarship? And I got into some theater classes and I actually really enjoyed it. Finally having the courage to do it, like really enjoyed it. Did a couple plays at Madison, did a couple student films. And then towards the end of senior year, decided I was going to try it. I remember my dad kept saying, "You want to go to the Peace Corps? Do you want to go to the Peace Corps? You want to do this?" And I remember thinking, God, I do not want to go to the Peace Corps. In hindsight, it would have been awesome. But at that time, I was like, going to live in Africa for 2 years, that's a little too far of a move for me right now. I got to maybe baby steps here. And I ended up deciding to move to Chicago. I was too afraid to move straight to LA, but I was like, hey, there's some there's a lot of great training in Chicago. I can go check it out. And then senior year at Madison, I sent some headshots and resumes down to Chicago agents just to, didn't know what I was doing. It was like you looked it up in a book and you found the address and you sent them, and ended up getting called one day and saying, "Hey, we're making a movie. Do you want to come stand in a couple scenes?" And I was like, "I don't know, what movie is it?" And they were like, "Well, it's starring Mel Gibson and Marissa Tomei and da-da-da." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there. What do I need to do?" So I went to, I ended up being a glorified extra. I actually got to say a couple things, but it all got cut out of the movie, of course. But it was a really cool experience and fun. And I literally sat next to Mel Gibson and had dinner one night. And when you're 22, having grown up in Madison, it was a pretty cool experience. So I went off to Chicago after that. And I like to tell people I had a really successful first month, and then it was pretty much downhill from there. I got some big auditions right away for a couple of actual TV shows that aired and whatever. And I, of course, didn't get them. But I remember thinking, hey, I've been here 1 month and God, I land any of these and I'm good to go. And then after that, it was just a lot of money on pictures and acting classes and, stuff like that. Did a couple things, but I had a teacher whose name was Bern Piven, Jeremy Piven's his son, who you might know from Entourage.
Yeah.
And Bern ran this theater workshop in Evanston. It was really hard to get into. You had to audition. And in my kind of last/third year of acting, I auditioned and I got in. And I remember thinking, wow, like, I can't believe I was able to get in this class. Like, this is my ticket. Here I go. And I'd take the L. I'd go up to Evanston, once or twice a week for class. And second week of class, Bern takes me aside and says, really liked having you. You seem like too normal to do this. And I remember thinking, what is this guy talking about? And what he meant was, acting is a really hard road. It's really subjective. And he basically said, look, you have to live on your friend's couch till you're 50, maybe. But if you love this, like, you should go do it. And unfortunately, it was before Jeremy had really hit it big. So he's like, look, my son is a phenomenal actor and, sleeps on his friend's couch most of the time because he doesn't have any money. So you cross-reference that with my kind of money mindset at that point of like, wait a minute, I really don't want to be poor forever. I started to think about maybe I should do something else. And, talking about transitions, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was actually living in Los Angeles, working in the entertainment industry. And she moved to Chicago to get her master's in psychology instead, made like a clean break from entertainment, was going to do something different. And I remember thinking, I really don't want to like pass her in the airport on my way out to LA and her way to Chicago. So that was in my head. And then a couple weeks later, after talking to me about it, Bern actually passed away. And he had leukemia, and he didn't, of course, none of us in his class really knew, but his close circle knew. And I just remember thinking, I'm not a religious guy, but I remember thinking like, wow, like, I'm probably the last person he ever told that to. Right. He probably gave that advice to everybody. And I'm like, boy, I really need to think about this. So that was kind of my acting career. And then I pivoted, liberal arts major from Wisconsin, no idea what he wants to do. What's the logical next step is to go be a lawyer. Right. So I took the LSAT. I talked my way into a law clerk job for a year and absolutely hated it with a passion. It was the worst thing ever for me. And my girlfriend had decided that she wanted to go back to California, didn't like the winter, wanted to go back to California and was going to go to grad school out there. So I had actually applied to some law schools, got into one in Northern California with her. And we decided to move, but I kind of joked that I told her on the plane that I'm coming, but I'm not going to go to law school. So I was just out there as like a 25-year-old, no idea what I wanted to do at that point, and had to look at another reinvention.
All right, I got a couple of follow-up questions in here that I've been holding on to. So you sat next to Mel Gibson. Did you actually talk to Mel? Like, did you get to talk with him, or was this just like he's over the couch?
Sure. So we were there was a craft services table, and at the end of all the shooting that day, everybody got to go eat, and of course all of us extras ate last. So there was like all the extras except for me, I think, were women that day, and I was trying to be gracious, and I let all the women go first and get their food, and I was the last one in line. And when I got my food, I walked over to the extra table where they were all sitting, and it was full. And the only seat left in the room was next to Mel Gibson and the director. And I was like standing there in the middle of the room, and I didn't. Of course, I wasn't going to go over there. Like, I'm not an idiot, and I just stood there. Like, I literally was standing up eating my food, and somebody at that table like waved me over, and they were like, "Just come sit down." So I went over and literally sat between Nancy Meyers, the director, and Mel Gibson. And the movie was What Women Want. People have probably heard of it or seen it. So I sat there quietly eating my food. I was like, there was no way I was going to say a word to anyone, unless spoken to. And no one spoke to me. But the funny thing is, and I hate to admit this, but it was back when I smoked cigarettes a little bit. I was so nervous. I quickly ate and ran outside to have a cigarette. And Mel Gibson came out to have a cigarette also and asked me if I had a light. And so I lit a cigarette, and then I stood there in complete silence for like 5 minutes because I was too afraid. I'm pretty sociable. I mean, I'm not really shy at all. I could not. I was like, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? And by the time I thought of anything, he went back inside. So I was in close proximity, never actually spoke a word to the man.
I was going to ask, like, if there was a takeaway that you learned from him or something like that. But this is a way better
Take
story.
your shot. Yeah.
There was
your shot. Say something.
There was zero words spoken. Man, that's really, really funny. So the next question I had was, when people are trying to think about what to do next. So you had this period where you're an actor and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do next. I feel like we have no process for exploring or seeing like what's out there, right? Your dad was a lawyer.
I agree.
So I'm assuming it was like, okay, that's the only thing I know. Like, let's take the LSAT. Was there anything that you did to try to explore, or if not, looking back, was there anything that you think you could have done to get a better idea of more alignment for you at that time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, my dad was a lawyer. I knew lawyers wore suits and went to court, and I thought I'd like to wear suits every day, and I do good in the court. I do well in the courtroom, so what a perfect fit. I mean, that was literally my analysis.
Yeah,
I was really fortunate that I got that year at as the law clerk prior to like going to law school, because if I had just blindly gone to law school, I wouldn't have known. Right. So I didn't do any analysis, but in hindsight, I got extremely lucky that I got that year of experience. And, what ended up happening, Mike, that kind of led me the other direction was our firm got acquired by Holland and Knight about halfway through the year I was there. So I went from literally like walking to the courthouse to like stamp a document and walk back. I mean, that was literally my job, to working for this bankruptcy this bankruptcy partner. And nobody liked him. He was not an easy human to get along with. And my boss said to me, look, you went to Wisconsin. You can probably read and write. Why don't you go work for him for the next 6 months? You'll learn a lot about law. And I was like, hey, this sounds great. And then about a week into it, I was like, this is the worst idea ever. I hate this. So I went out to lunch one day with some of the other, I was then a paralegal officially, and went out to lunch, and we talked about, how you do it, right? You complain about your boss and you talk about this, that, and the other thing. And one of them made a comment and said, thank God they pay us well. And I remember thinking, wait, I make like $27,000. What? And I asked them, they were, I'd gotten to know both of them pretty well. And I said, well, what do you guys make? And one of them was like 65 and the other one was like 75. And I was like, in my head, they didn't obviously say this to them, but I'm like, I'm cranking out way more work than both of you. I'm way smarter and work way more efficiently. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to go ask for a raise. So we get done with lunch and I go back and knock on HR's door, talk to my boss. And she's like, yeah, no. That's not how it works in law. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, it matters how long you've worked here. Not how, and I said, not how smart I am or how efficient I am or how much work I get done. And she's like, nope, not at all. And I remember going and then kind of got mad at me for asking for a raise. I mean, I remember like almost having to defend myself for going in there. And so that was in my head as I went back to my desk and I thought about it. And obviously for weeks after that, I was like, well, that doesn't seem like a good system for me. Yeah. Or, I mean, frankly, for anyone, but like,
right.
I want to get paid. If I can do the same amount of work in half the amount of time and it's better than how you do it, I should get paid for that. Right. Or I should get paid more, or I should have to work less, or whatever the equation was. And I did. It's a kind of a cheesy title to name now, but I stumbled upon the book Rich Dad Poor Dad around that time. And, I read it and that opened up a whole new world to me. Like I didn't know any of that stuff existed. I knew buildings were there. I never once had thought about how did that building actually come to be? Who owns it? How does it work? When I pay rent, where the heck does that rent go? Like literally had never thought about that in my whole life. So reading that book kind of right around the time that this interaction with the law firm happened really kind of, jarred me and was like, there's got to be something else out there better than this and some other avenue to like have a career.
So that book, was that the catalyst for getting interested in real estate specifically, or more so, just the kind of the broad concept that I had never even thought about how rent works. There's probably a lot of things that I'm missing.
Right. It was, I would say the answer is both.
Okay.
So I thought, wow, there's this real estate thing. And I learned about passive income, all the basics. Like if you buy a house and rent it out and the rent is more than your mortgage and your expenses, there's some money left over. And I was like, that's kind of an interesting thing. And when we moved out to California, I didn't know what I want to do. The internet was the internet, but it was early 2003. You weren't, Google wasn't alive. None of this stuff was real yet. So there was no way to just go online and like research stuff for 12 hours a day. Right. So I realized I got to talk to people. And I literally got on the phone, Mike, and just started calling. I'd call one of my uncles and then what do you do for a living? Tell me about it. And then he'd say, oh, you should call my friend Bob. And I'd call Bob. And I mean, I spent like 3 or 4 months just calling and having all these conversations. And, everybody was super great and gracious and helpful. A lot of them I was like, wow, that sounds terrible too. I don't want to do that either. But I had an uncle, actually, my Uncle Brian, who was living in Stillwater at the time. And this was, 03, 04. He was converting an old prison to apartments. And I remember listening to him and like him describing his work and all of that. And I remember thinking, that sounds amazing. And also kind of in the same vein, like, I think I'd actually be good at that. Like corralling people, like making certain decisions, but basically not having to be the expert at anything, but kind of getting a team of really smart people together and then helping them go in the right direction and all that. And so that conversation was really the catalyst for me to say, wow, I want to at least go explore that field, right? Like that seems amazing. It was back when you used to have to send a cover and resume to get a job to everywhere you went. So I printed out 200 resumes and wrote a whole bunch of cover letters and sent them to basically anybody and anything that did real estate in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I figured, somebody will call me, right? Like, I'm a smart guy. I worked at a law firm for a year. And, it's funny now as a developer thinking if I had gotten my resume at that point, like it would have gone straight into the garbage. And so, this one woman called me randomly and said, we're hiring for a receptionist position. And I said, great, I'll take it. And she was like, well, no, I'm not offering it to you. I just, telling you. And I ended up going up and meeting with the team and whatever. And it was like an hour and a half from my apartment. And I ended up taking that job as a receptionist at age 26. And that's kind of how I got started.
So in this conversation with your Uncle Brian, what was it about? You kind of described some of the things that you liked and what you thought you'd be good at. What did you know about yourself that mapped well to that?
Sure.
So one of the things that I try to do with people and help coach them on is to really kind of start from that foundational level of what are your advantages in the world? Like what do you do well? What do you like? All of these different types of things. And let's go explore, those things, right? Like, or I should say parallels to those things, how you can use those things. What I'm curious is how your brain mapped that together.
So at that point, at this point, I know a bunch. Now I can tell you exactly why it's a good fit for me.
Yeah.
At that point, there was a couple of things that stood out. And I admittedly, I knew myself. I probably had a little bit of a unrealistic picture of myself at that point, still thinking, well, I just was almost an actor. And now I wasn't really sure. But there's a couple of things that stuck out. One was kind of being the generalist, if you will, and kind of I hate to use the word schemer. That's not really a good word to use, but the person that kind of came up with this crazy idea and then got everybody kind of on board and sold the vision and sold the dream. And, I mapped that back to high school and college. Like I was always the guy in my group of friends who was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. And they would always be like, this sounds like we're never going to pull this off. And I'm like, yes, we are. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make this work. And here's how. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. I'm going to do this. I've always been a good, again, not a hype man, but like I've always been able to convince, I've been persuasive and able to get people on board with like an idea that I have. And that I'd always been able to do that. So that kind of mapped to it for sure. I was like, yeah, that's kind of what you're doing here, is getting people excited about something. And the other piece was the design piece. I'd always, it didn't dawn on me until that point. Like I'd always been obsessed with architecture, always. In high school, like my girlfriend and I used to drive around and look at houses that I thought were cool. And I still, to this day, I'm not sure why she did that. She must have really liked me to do that with me. But like I've always been really attuned to the built environment around me. I like my mood changes depending on what room I'm in. Sometimes it's interesting. I'm very affected by the built environment, and I've always like just been obsessed with it. And again, I didn't realize that like there was a career. Like again, I didn't realize there was anything to that, but those two things, and then, just the little I had learned about real estate at that point, I was like, this seems like as good as anything to give a shot to, right? And I went in kind of, and I'm kind of surprised about it this many years later, like with a pretty open mind of like, this might not be it, but, I'm having all these learning lessons, right? I'm trying, I've always been good at just jumping into, like not being scared to jump into something. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so that was part of this opportunity. I was like, look, I'm going to drive an hour each way and for barely any money. And this may be a really terrible idea, but it could also turn out to be an amazing start to something. And that's what happened.
So interesting that your insights about architecture, even going back to, to high school, because this is one of the things I try to get people to understand. Your advantage, or what you could use to do something different, is literally hiding in plain sight, and it could be anything. And there's like a lot of people that get to be our age and then want to change something. We have to do some real work to kind of reverse engineer that, because our mind is just a filter. So we're like, oh yeah, I like yoga, but I can't make money at yoga. Or we do all of these things discounting this. And you're literally taking, I get chills because you're literally taking something that you thought was just a quirk, running around looking at houses when you're a high schooler. And that ends up being a driving force, a driving advantage that drives your interest in the subject matter and gets you to a place where you are confident enough that you should be betting in this direction. Not that it's going to work, but that it's good enough to be betting in this direction. It feels right. That's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, it was, it really was. And it for me now, I mean, even today, and I'll just long story short, but, being in real estate for 20 years, in the beginning, I realized I was way more design focused than most of the people I met. And I thought, I remember saying to my first boss multiple times, I should probably just go be an architect. Because I'm like, I really just care. I'm all product. Like, I just want to create the coolest, best thing I can. And he would always be like, yeah, you should still be the developer, because you basically tell the architect what to do. And I remember being like, okay, well, that seems like a better plan. But, now, even now, I thought for a long, long time that I didn't fit in the real estate industry because of my quirks.
Mm-hmm.
And now I realize at this point in my life and my career, they're what separate me from a lot of the other people. You know? I mean, it took a long time to come to that, but now, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think you can't get to that point. You can only get to that point in hindsight. Like, right. I think you just have that there's just that part that you have to be willing to sort of surrender over and feel the feeling and trust to a certain extent that you're going in the right way. And then you sort of connect the dots looking backwards, which is kind of interesting as well. So you had this really open mind, which is, I think, unique as well, to say, all right, well, I'm going to give this real estate thing a shot. And I'm going to start by being a receptionist, because I just getting the foot in the door. I feel like a lot of people these days, I'm not just going to, rag on millennials, but because it shows up in my generation as well. But there's this level of get what you deserve, it's sort of like unrealistic expectations around what you deserve. And your kind of mentality at the time, and I've seen this in your writing as well, is the foot in the door matters. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that. Is that just like how did you think about that? Or are you just sort of naturally like that? Oh, I'll take whatever comes here.
I've never had the most prestige or the best, I was never number one in my class. I was up there, but I was never like, so I never had that like easy in the door in everything I wanted to do, even in sports at high school. Like, I was fortunate to get to be on all the varsity teams, but like, I had to work so hard to be a starter or to get playing time or to, I wasn't naturally, I was good, I was decent, but I wasn't naturally big and gifted like a bunch of other people. So I've always had I just got to get on the team mentality. And when I have done that, I think for whatever reason, and it's partially just me paying attention over the years, is I end up kind of being the leader or the captain or the person that people are kind of drawn to or want to look like. People look to me to like, okay, Sean, what are we going to do now? Like, how are we going to fix this? Or how are we going to, what are we going to do? And I've learned just through those experiences over time, for me, at least for me, I just got to get in the door. Mm-hmm. And if I can get in the door, I'm smart. I work super hard. I do, I do a lot of the things, like nothing is below me to do, I do anything I need to. And, that people are attracted to that. People like that. And so I've always found, like, even if I got in the door as the number 50th person, 3 years later, I'm number 3, or I've gotten in the door, and then I've been able to elevate my position once I'm in the door through the actions I'm taking. It's a silly story, but I remember being on my Little League team my first year when they did the draft for the 12-year-old thing. And I was 11-year-old, and I remember my coach, like, I think it was the last kid picked because I was so small. I was good, but I was really small. And then compared to the 12-year-olds, it was like, whatever, And I remember being at a practice, like, so the first like 5 or 6 games, like I didn't, I didn't play till the 4th inning. It was all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I remember being at a practice like 2 months into the season and helping the coach throw batting practice and like running after all the balls. And I remember he looked at me and just said, when I picked you, I never would have thought you cared this much and you liked it this much and you were this into it. And by the end of the year, I was like the starting shortstop on the team. It was like, and it just, there was always something for me about just getting in the door. Because I really believe that. And I tell when people ask me now, I tell them all the time, if you're good, if you believe in yourself, if you think you can do the thing, you just got to get in the room. Because most people don't do the thing when they're in the room, right? Most people are like, okay, cool, I'm in the room. I don't have to do anything else. So I think there's a real different mindset of like getting in the room and then proving your worth versus here are my credentials. I should be in the room to begin with.
And connecting back, the interesting part to me here is you recognize that the system for you to thrive wasn't law. Like, law didn't allow you to do that thing. You got in the room with law, but you still had to follow some stupid process. And you're like, oh, that's a fundamental thing here that is not going to work for me. Right. Which I think, again, connecting back is sort of interesting to see. Because I think a lot of people get in those situations. They're like, oh, well, no, I just have to sacrifice here. I got to put in my dues. I got to wait and I got to work hard, but I got to, wait for this. No, it's like, if you're okay with that, fine. But if you're not set up that way, if your brain's not wired that way, and you know your brain's not wired that way, you are setting yourself up for a life of misery.
Yep.
And that is something fundamental that you need to figure out and change and do something different, so that you can thrive and be your best self.
Totally agree. I mean, I'm now, looking back, realizing I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I never saw myself as somebody that did that kind of stuff. And now looking back at age 45, looking back to all the stuff I've done since I was 18, I'm like, I've been an entrepreneur the whole entire damn time.
And I didn't know it. Yeah.
And I didn't think I fit that label. I wouldn't put that label on myself. And now looking back, that's exactly what I did for 25 years.
So let's take this conversation forward a little bit. So you obviously stayed in real estate from this receptionist job, and you ended up doing what you kind of said you were going to do. You were going to work your way up, and you were going to prove your worth, and you started bringing in a lot of business, and you went from making, $20,000 as a receptionist to $300,000 bringing in deals for your firm. And people might think, all right, that's success right there. Boom. Story ends. Like, let's shut the mic off. But that's not really the case with you either. You kind of started to keep reinventing yourself. So talk us through that period. I mean, I think this is like, 2011, 2017-ish timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah. So I spent, the quick receptionist, follow-up is I started as the receptionist. It was a small firm doing big things. So a couple years in, I was a project manager. I was up and down Silicon Valley managing projects, and actually was named an associate partner the night before Lehman Brothers went under. And
nice. Great timing.
Really good timing. So again, like I had worked for 5 years for peanuts to kind of get into a certain spot. And then the world said, nope, not this. You're not there yet. And that was a period where, living in the Bay Area is extremely expensive. And I realized I'm not going to make any bonuses for a couple of years. Like we can't afford to stay out here. So we looked at some other cities and then ended up transitioning to Minneapolis. It's where my wife grew up. And, me being from Madison was close. And there was no jobs at the time because it was a great financial crisis. And I ended up getting a job at a nonprofit developer briefly and worked there. And then when the market improved in 2011, started buying properties for this fund here in Minneapolis. And it kind of went from there. But, I went from receptionist to associate partner to living in my mother-in-law's basement for like a year and a half because we had no money at age 31. Newly married. I joke that people know my wife loves me because she's been with me since I was 23 and the whole, through the whole ride, and it hasn't changed. So that, it's certainly pretty cool. But I got into this firm finally in 2011. Finally, my timing was good. Started to buy properties all over the country on behalf of this fund, worked on commission. And Mike went from I had never made $100,000 a year at that point when I started. And I was 33, I think, when I started with them. So my first year I made about 130. My next year I made 190, and it just kept going up from there. So exactly, like you would think that I was good. Like that was it. I made it. I'm done. Like, here we go. Like, pat myself on the back, right? Like I got it. I made
jobs on autopilot. Let's go bring in the country club and all that kind of stuff.
Living the dream. Yeah. Exactly. And I was, for the first couple of years, that's what it felt like, because, having basically had that goal in mind for about 12 years now to make something of myself. And I finally felt like it felt great. I was really happy, and, we were able to buy a house in a really nice neighborhood in Minneapolis. And I was able to buy, I remember buying an Acura and being like, I can't believe I'm buying an Acura, stuff like that. And it was cool. And, it was great for a while. And then, it started to, like, once the money, and by no means was I just like good to go financially, but as you said, like I was making pretty healthy annual compensation at that point, several $100,000. But once that became the norm, once I had done that for, a few years in a row, it caused me to be, to really step back and say, am I enjoying this at all? The money's great, but now I'm on the treadmill of like, I just have to do this every year. And do I actually like this? Do I like the people I'm working with? Am I in a good situation? And again, it was no one's fault outside of mine, but I realized I wasn't passionate about just buying real estate. I really missed the creative process of creating it. And so I started to have those thoughts a lot, and I just started to realize, like, there came a point where I realized that, oh my God, I think I have to do something. I think I have to pivot yet again. And I remember fighting it, like, with everything I had. I would just fight. I would like stuff that. Nope, no. We're not going to think about that. Stuff that down. Go. You're making $400,000 this year. Do not think about this at all. Let it go. And I remember my office was a reverse commute. So it was like 10 minutes from my house. I mean, it was wonderful. And I remember I would drive there and I'd be in a good mood. I had 2 young kids at the time. I was like, life was good. I'd drive to work. I'd pull into this ramp that was next to our building, and there was like a little walkway to get through it. And I would get stuck in my car. And I like couldn't physically get out of my car. Like literally my body wouldn't move. And I remember I would give myself these pep talks like we just kind of had, right? I would look in the rearview mirror and be like, dude, you're living the dream. What's wrong with you? Like, go inside, make some money, and then go home and have fun. Like, what's the problem here? If Sean from 10 years ago saw you right now, what would he say? It was like all those guilt trips I was throwing on myself of like, you should be happy. And the other piece of it was the company I was working for, great company. But I was getting paid on commission on the projects I was buying. And I had said to them, like, look, this is fantastic. I'm so grateful. I'd love to have some equity in the projects I'm buying, or I'd love to be able to buy some equity or something, because I'm basically an in-house broker, which is fine and it's great, but I'm not building any wealth for my family. I'm just making a lot of income every year, and I got to figure out how to use that to build wealth. I don't come from wealth. I'd like to be able to, as we've talked, break the cycle and change things.
Yeah.
And, I was met with a lot of resistance with that too, in the company, which, in hindsight ended up being a blessing in disguise, but at the time was very frustrating for me to be told no repeatedly. When I thought I was adding, I was buying over $100 million of real estate for these guys every year, and being told, nope, you don't get to own any of it. Sorry. And basically the same pep talk I was giving myself, my boss was giving me there of like, you're one of the highest paid acquisitions people in the Twin Cities. What are you complaining about?
Right.
Like, why are you asking for more? And I'm not gaslighting me as much, but just, so I'd go home and I'd just be like, what am I, is it me? Like, am I nuts? Like, what is going on here? And, unfortunately it had a really, like, my best year ever in 2016 financially, and probably the worst year of my life, or one of them. Right. And that was after being at the firm for about 5.5 years. Just a bunch of stuff happened. My mom, who had been sick for a while, passed away. And my roommate from college passed away, and we had our second kid, and all of that in like 60 days. And then, even though it sounds ridiculous, the Cubs won the World Series shortly after that too. And it was like all of these once in a lifetime things happened in like a span of 3 months. And it just shook me to my core.
Yeah.
And I had been having all these thoughts and feelings and like, what is going on here? And then all this stuff happened. And I remember it so clearly. We were in the process of renovating our house. So we had moved out and we were living in a rental house nearby. And I remember waking up super early one day, or shortly after my mom died. And for some reason, I like felt compelled to go outside. Like, I still to this day can't tell you why. And I went outside, and I remember sitting on the stoop, and I remember just like looking at the sun, and just like, it just like was like somebody snapped their fingers and they were like, life is short, move on.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was so clear. My next feeling was, complete and utter fear over like, oh, yes, crap, what does that mean? What do I have to go do now? But I just, I remember thinking my mom was in her mid 70s and I was 38 at the time. Right. I'm like, that's halfway.
Right.
Right. I mean, hopefully I live a lot longer and whatever, but if I don't, I'm halfway there. And I remember thinking, if I died today, would I be proud of the life I lived? And for some reasons, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I have a great family. I mean, my wife and I have been together, as I said, for 22 years at this point. Like, we have wonderful kids. Like, I've done some good work, but I felt I had this feeling of like, I haven't done what I'm here to do.
Right.
I mean, and again, I'm not religious. I'm not like, woo woo about that stuff, but like, I couldn't shake it. And it just was like one of these moments in life where I just said, you know what? I guess I got to go do it again. And oh crap, here we go. And I remember about a week later telling my wife, going to my wife, Kim, and saying, Kim, I think I'm going to have to quit my job. And she was like, oh, okay, honey. Like, she was like, busy with the kids and doing the dishes. She was like, okay, sure, honey, that sounds good. And I said, no, I don't think you heard me. And she goes, well, what do you mean? Like, in like 5 years, or like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, I think I'm going to put my 2-week notice in next week. And she like dropped the dishes. Was like, what now? And it just, but it was one of those things, Mike. I tell people, if you did like the pluses and minuses on a piece of paper, and trust me, I did that like a bunch of times trying to talk myself out of it.
I know exactly what you're going to say, but go.
The pluses, there was like 2 pluses and there was like 47 minuses.
100%. But
the pluses, those 2 pluses outweighed all 47 minuses to me. And I said, I don't care if I fail. I don't care if I have to do this. And I just had to, and I did it.
You're listening to the Break Podcast, powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
Viscerally familiar story to me. And I don't talk a lot about myself on this podcast, and so sure, I'm not going to bore people with it, but I want you to know, like, I verbatim understand that story. And I'm so glad you gave it the time of day, because that's what I want people to take away from this conversation and these conversations is what it feels like to be in conflict. I think there are so many people listening, and I talk to people all the time, high achievers, making good money, who have that conversation in the mirror with themselves
all the time.
And what is wrong here? I'm making $400,000 or $500,000, $300,000, whatever it is. I'm making more than I ever dreamed of. My kid, we do all of this stuff. We got a big fancy house. Isn't this the American dream? But they're repressing how they're feeling, right? Yeah. There's a feel component to this. And this is something I really had to learn, because I grew up with a lawyer, very logical person, right? And logic rules, right? And man, it is like opened up another world. We have to tune into that like gut-wrenching feel that we can't shake. And you have to pay attention to that. And you have to figure out why that's there. What are you running from or towards or whatever? Because that's right. And these moments happen around this is the break moment. I mean, the moments happen so much around trauma or loss. I mean, we saw a lot of this with COVID, right? But also your mom, Esther, passing away, who is a wonderful, wonderful woman. I remember very fondly, and having a bunch of other things there. Like, it starts to put things in perspective of what is actually important. And I think that's maybe defines a break moment more than anything, is like when things in your mind just all of a sudden start to like Tetris pieces fall into place in terms of how you prioritize things. This often happen, like it often takes like a big event to push yourself over the edge. And it just always reminds me of this quote from Confucius. It's like, every man has 2 lives, and the second begins when he realizes there's only one. And it's like, those moments are what kicks it. And you either, in that moment, you either say, this is too big for me to ignore. I must go in this direction, no matter if I fail. Or you live this sort of quiet, slinking misery, making your money and doing whatever. How have you, I know you've had lots of conversations with other people that have probably had a similar moment. Have you figured out the differences between people that say, I'm going forth no matter what, or I'm putting this off another year? Has that ever crystallized for you? Is that something I'm kind of searching for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's, there are people, it's so scary.
Yeah.
Right. It's terrifying. It's so terrifying. And even guys, and not knowing your situation specifically, but I'm going to make some assumptions that it was, somewhat parallel to mine or similar, where, if you fell or if you failed, it wouldn't be utter devastation. You'd be able to get another job, right? You'd pick and that was always the thing for me. It was like, my wife would always tell me, what's the worst that's going to happen? Once I got going and had all the same fears come up, and she would always say, what's the worst that's going to happen? You have to go back and get a job? Like, oh no, like you'll be fine, right? And at least you'll have tried, and at least you'll know. I think it's, for a lot of people, the fear of the unknown feels scarier than the terrible feeling that they sit with every day.
Right.
And there's something,
it's a known.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's safer. Yeah. It's safer to know pain and to know, disappointment and to know frustration and all of those things than it is to take that leap. And, it was interesting when I put my notice in and left my last job, I had several people from that company specifically come, stop in my office to say goodbye and all that kind of stuff. And the one thing I'll never forget is several of them said, I wish I had the courage to do what you're doing.
Yeah. And
I remember thinking and looking at some of them and thinking, you're so much better than me at this. Why are you not? Like, what are you talking about? But I said, my wife, we have a friend who, same thing. It's 25 years of I'm going to do it next year. I'm going to do it next year. I'm going to do it next year. Smarter than me, probably better at it than me, for sure. And, my wife was asking me the other day, why is he not doing it? What? And I said, I think at the end of the day, some people just have more courage. And it sucks to say that. It's not meant, to demean other people, but some people just do it. And I think most people don't. Most people don't. And there's just some people who the pain of the known becomes, I think for me, maybe that's the way to say it as I'm talking this out.
Yeah.
The pain of the known to me became worse than the fear of the unknown. Yeah. There came a moment, and every moment then after, the fear, the pain of staying where I was worse than taking this chance, was worse than making this leap, because I knew that this was not it for me, and I was not happy with this. And that got so bad that it was I didn't tell a lot of people this when I left my job, but part of it was, I just need to quit and step aside for a month or two and get some space and see what that feels like and see what that means. And, I told everybody I was quitting to start my own firm and to do my company. And, Mike, in the back of my head, I thought maybe I just need space for a couple of months, and maybe another job will come along that'll be better. Or maybe some, it wasn't as much of I absolutely have to do my own thing. Screw this, do that. It just was the pain of now it is worse than anything else that I could feel.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you described it so well. And I feel like what you just understood thinking through it has given me some insight on how to really define that break moment. It's that moment the pain becomes, greater.
There you go. That's it. Yep.
That's the tipping point, I think. So obviously you were able to go forth and start to do deals, and you have a really significant ownership position in a lot of real estate. You're doing great things for the city of Minneapolis. There's this piece that you've talked about also about not feeling like you were being your authentic self, that I would love for you to talk a little bit about as well, because I've definitely felt that, and I hear it from so many people, that it's not necessarily
it's a money thing or whatever, but it's
Right,
more of
right.
like, how do I just bring who I really am into the workplace, into what I do every day?
Yeah, no, that is, that is the thing. I said to somebody the other day, they were like, can you believe that you have almost 70,000 followers on Twitter? They're like, that must just feel so good. And I said, it's cool. It's fun. I mean, of course, but I'm like, what the best part about it is that it's just from being myself. I'm literally just putting myself, good, bad, and ugly, out there. And that's what people are attracted to. And I said, that's the coolest thing about this whole thing. And that's the best part of my life now, Mike, is I get to dress how I want. I get to have a ponytail and a beard if I want, much to the chagrin of my business partner and other people and my dad. But like, look, I'm my own man. I mean, within reason, right? I mean, I have a family and I have obligations and whatever, but like, I can wake up when I want to. I can make my schedule how I want to. I can take on deals that I want to. I don't have to take on deals that I don't want to. And I had this fantasy shortly after starting my company that someday my dream would be to go to one of the like real estate conventions or like one of the like meetings that they have every couple of times a year. Everybody is in suits, everybody. And I wanted to show up in my t-shirt and my Jordans and my jeans.
Yeah.
And just because I could. And I know that sounds silly, but I've done it and I do it. I mean, I wear jeans and Jordans every day, and I go meet with high level bankers or high level finance people and I wear a hoodie sweatshirt and a t-shirt and tennis shoes. And it's just, I feel like so much. That's the best part. I feel like myself all day, every day. Like I'm just able to be me. I don't have to compromise. I don't have to, pardon my language, I don't have to go kiss some boss's ass. I don't have to, and honestly, when you're in a big company, you're kind of an actor when you're there. You're playing a part and you're playing a role and like, you have to kind of play the game. And for me, that was exhausting. It was absolutely exhausting.
Totally.
And, sure, is making more money even better? Yeah, it's been great. But the fact that I get to do it being my authentic self or, as close as I can be, is like, you remember what I said about when I was thinking about my mom and about how if I died, would I be proud of my life? Oh, it's going to make me well up. So I'm going to try to hold it together here. But, I'm 7 years removed from sitting on that porch. And if I died tomorrow, I'd be really proud of myself.
And that's the difference. That's where the magnitude of the pluses, the two pluses in the one column, how big those are compared to the 40 or 50 minuses.
Yep.
That's the key right there. In 7 years, you flip that script and you just that feeling. It's that feeling.
I mean, I hope to live, I hope to live another 45, 50, 60 years for sure. But I can say, Mike, with 100% honesty, if I died tomorrow, I'd die happy because I've done what I needed to do. And I hope there's a lot more that I get to do, but I've done what I needed to do.
That's amazing. I love it. I want to ask about some lessons learned through this whole deal. Because you're definitely someone who strikes me as you're not done reinventing yourself. I know you're doing a few more things, kind of testing the waters and doing some things related to more the creator personality and building maybe offshoot businesses, and feel free to jump in and talk about all of that kind of stuff. But I'm interested in some of the lessons about reinvention. So the first thing that struck me was that I think makes a ton of sense was that if I was 25 again, I'd spend 90% of my time and money working on my mental health, confidence, feeling comfortable in my own skin, risk tolerance, emotional regulation, so forth, and 10% of my technical skills. Because there's no such thing as long-term success without mental health. Talk to us about why you came to that conclusion and why that is so important that you would spend 90% of your time in your 20s working on that.
That's one of my favorite tweets that I've ever written.
Awesome.
It's because that for me, and I think for others, it's not, for so many people, it's not their aptitude or their technical skills or there's some, right? I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule, but most people, I mean, I've come to believe that mindset is, without mindset, and it doesn't matter how good you are at anything. And there's so many examples of, I mean, read any newspaper any day and it's a successful person that went sideways and, did something ridiculous, or, you read about Tiger Woods. I mean, all those people, right? I mean, people don't, if you're messed up in your head, you can't hold it together no matter how good you are at your sport, at your job, at your business. So I feel very, very strongly that that's the game. The mental side of life is the game. All the other stuff is, you have to work hard. You have to get good at something. I mean, all of that is important, but none of that, to me, or in my opinion, lasts for too long if the mental stuff isn't taken care of.
Is there a difference in your mind between quote unquote mental health and mindset? And are you talking about the two differently or the same?
I do think maybe it's slightly different. To me, mental health means knowing your internal enemies and and having the wherewithal to be conscious of them. I think there's a lot of people, again, not necessarily their fault, but who move through life so unconsciously and so detached from their feelings and the things that are going on with them personally that they can't regulate when stuff comes up. I mean, and I have a long way to go with all that, but there are times now where my wife and I will get in a fight, or we'll have an argument, or I'll snap at one of my kids by mistake, and I will literally stop myself and look at them and say, you know what? I felt scared in that moment. I'm sorry that I said that to you. That had nothing to do with you. And I think over a long period of time, that's going to go a long way to my kids that they saw me do that and they know that. And could I do that 20 years ago? Absolutely not. But, now I've gotten to a point where I'm pretty in tune with myself, good and bad. I mean, you joke now, if I ever had another job interview and they said, what are your weaknesses? I'm like, I can actually tell you exactly what my challenges are. But, it's being conscious of that stuff, like not living on autopilot and not having your emotional life be on autopilot, which unfortunately I think it is for a lot of people. So I think that to me, that is mental health. That is the cornerstone. I would even argue that's more important than mindset, because I spent a lot of years listening to Tony Robbins and positive thinking and all this other stuff. And guess that didn't do shit for me. Mm-hmm. That's not lasting, right? That's moment to moment. Look at yourself in the mirror every day and say affirmations. If your mental health is a mess, that's not going to do anything for you. If your mental health is good and you're healthy, that's different, right? Then you can use these mindset tools to become even better at things and more fit, all the good things that come from those mindset tools. But, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people that will disagree with me and argue with me about this or say, that's not right. But I really think unless your mental health is clear, it's really hard to implement a lot of those mindset tools.
Where I see a crossover, again, I'm not probably as versed in all of this as you are or others, but
I've spent a fortune on therapy.
It's an investment. It was.
It absolutely was.
Yeah. But where I see a crossover is this idea of kind of self-doubt, I guess, because I think that can start as mental health, and maybe parts of it can be overcome with mindset and some other tools, but some of it's very deeply ingrained. But I see self-doubt and the idea of reinvention, resilience, the ability to change as being very intricately linked. Mm-hmm. You can't reinvent yourself. You can't do something else. Every time you do that, you are going to feel self-doubt.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about that interplay, because I kind of said a couple of minutes ago, I know you're going to continue to reinvent yourself. So talk to us a little bit about how you think about self-doubt and your comfort zone and how you just kind of keep going, and maybe give some examples from what you're going through now.
Sure. It's, it's not, it's uncomfortable. Part of the reason, I think, we were talking about people who make these leaps and people who maybe don't. There's definitely a group that doesn't due to what we talked about, due to the fear of it and the other thing. I think there's another subset of those people that don't make a leap or don't ever do the thing that they really want to because they're just comfortable. They've gotten into this comfort zone of everything's easy. This is autopilot. Like, yeah, I'm not doing the thing I want, but my bills are paid. My family's happy. Like, we get to go on a couple trips a year. Like, we're good. It's just easy because every time you reinvent yourself, it sucks, at least at first. Right. I mean, when I left my job, I didn't make any money for 2.5 years.
Right.
Our credit cards were getting declined at the grocery store. Like my wife would call me and be like, honey, I can't get the groceries. And I'm like, yep, it's because I couldn't pay the credit card bill. And that's at age 40 after having made hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for several years prior to that. And, that's tough. And that messes with your head too of like, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And it's just tough to every time that you try to do something new I think, at least in my experience, it gets worse before it gets better. And it gets more difficult and you're filled. I tweeted something the other day. Part of what I'm doing now is, for whatever reason, having all these online followers, people are asking me for more stuff and I'm trying to put stuff out there. And I started a newsletter recently. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm having to read the copy of the newsletter. Being an actor, having actual training, I thought this will be totally fine. And God, you turn the microphone on, Mike, and it's like my self-doubt was like 100 out of 10.
Yeah.
And I like listened to myself. And I'm like, I sound terrible. I sent it to my editor. He's like, you sound terrible. And, you get in your head and it's tough. And you have to, I've been so uncomfortable for so long in so many different situations that I'm used to it now. And I literally can say to myself sometimes, boy, this sucks. This is one of those periods where everything feels hard and everything feels tough. But if you keep going, it'll get easier, right? When I started my first development deal, I had to convince a lot of people to trust me. And, there was so many days where I'm like, I can't believe I just convinced that guy to give us $1 million. Like, do I have a clue what I'm doing here? Mm-hmm. Like, and I remember one day walking through another guy's project, that ours was just starting and his was getting close to being finished. And he was pointing out all these features and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, we don't have that. We don't have this. We don't have that. Oh my God. Like I had this total meltdown. I walked out and I'm like, we need to call everybody and give them their money back. Like, oh my God, what are we doing? Like, it just, there's so much, like, until you've done the thing a couple times, I've never met anybody that like can just do it without feeling if they're being honest with how they're actually feeling, that can start new things and not feel that way. I finally got into so I would say of my 6 years of owning my company, the first 3 were pretty damn uncomfortable. And the last 3 have been pretty comfortable, which has been kind of a nice break in the action for me for a while. And now, in Minneapolis and a lot of the Midwest cities, maybe not Madison, obviously, but like a lot of other places, with interest rates where they are, with construction costs where they are, like building new stuff right now is really tough to pencil, really tough to make sense. Mm-hmm. We're not actively really working on anything. We're finishing a project, but we're not starting anything. We don't have anything in our pipeline, really. And that's pretty common among a lot of developers.
Right.
And one of the things that I've started to spend some time on is looking at this online, I hate to use the term, I said to this earlier, I hate to use the term influencer because it was never intentional. It's kind of an accidental thing, but being able to affect change with the reach I have online now, which has been really cool. And I'm learning, I've basically spent the last few months like deep diving into this stuff and, talk about feeling like an idiot again. I mean, yeah. I just like, I had to go back to like 101 and I was like, wait, so what does this mean? Like, what is a newsletter? What is an email list? Like, what does this mean? Why do you do it? Like, and I'm asking these people who are very successful about this stuff and they look at me and aren't you like don't you know stuff? And it's like, it's literally going from finally feeling like kind of on top of the mountain back down to like, oh, nope, now I'm back on the bottom of the mountain again, trying to find my way up. And it's been a very humbling I mean, it reminds you that like, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how good you are at anything. Like when you try something new, it's difficult, it's scary, and it's going to make you feel uncomfortable.
We're so conditioned to want to feel like experts. And so at 45 and being, a quote unquote real estate expert, and then like the turmoil comes from like breaking that barrier down of Sean as a 45-year-old, like, smart, wealthy expert into a baby novice again at something else. I mean, that's like the crux of the feeling, I feel like. And we're almost conditioned to repel that and try to avoid it.
Oh,
the
totally.
good
And
news.
I'm really like,
go ahead.
Frankly, not to be self-congratulatory, but I'm proud of myself. Like I don't need to do this. And I'm like doing it, and I'm like thinking about it to myself, like, good for you, dude. Like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get uncomfortable right now. But it's, and 3 months later, I know so much more, and it's actually starting to become fun now, and it's exciting, and I'm doing all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like I can step outside of myself and see this as, because I've had this pattern now, I can step outside myself and kind of see this like, oh, this is just another point in the process. This doesn't mean this is who you are. Doesn't mean this is what you're all about. This is just another step in your evolution and process.
Yeah. And doing hard, uncomfortable things is a transferable skill to anywhere that you go. So, I mean, it's well worth its weight in gold to do whatever you have to do to, instead of reflexively repelling that feeling, to sit there in that uncomfort and just sit with that discomfort and be like, yeah, this sucks. But you know what? I'm not alone here. Everybody feels the same way when they try to do something new. I mean, I think you said in that video that you were quoting from is anything above average, to do anything above average, you have to get out of your comfort zone, feel that, but then keep going. Like it was something to that effect. And I think that's just so true. And to be able to continuously hone that muscle is a complete life skill that is so transferable everywhere.
Absolutely. No, I think it's cool. I mean, this has been a really great conversation, and I love that you're doing this podcast in this way, because this is the stuff that hearing, I mean, I feel like, I try to do this, like I'm trying to give permission to people, right?
Yes.
Like if you look up to me and I'm open about this stuff, then maybe it's gonna give you the courage to do it, or it's gonna give you permission to say, wow, Sean feels uncomfortable again. Like, yeah, I can probably make that phone call or take that risk or do that thing. Like I think what you're doing is really great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to wrap this up with you. I promise. I know we're going maybe a little bit long.
I've never been known to be short-winded, so.
but I really appreciate you saying that. That word permission comes up so much. It's actually in my LinkedIn bio headline. It's like, you have my permission, because it comes up over and over in my conversations, where when people finally get some coaching or get over that hump of disbelief, it feels like, or when they make a connection with another person that's been along a similar path, it feels like permission for them, and they've gotten permission. I've heard it so many times that I think that is a really powerful word.
Yep, I totally agree. I think that's why I honestly think, I mean, I know people follow me because they think my buildings are cool and like all of that, but I think that that's a big part of why people follow me, is for whatever reason, I've never been afraid to put that stuff out there. I mean, don't get me wrong. When I first started tweeting about my mental health, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm going to blow everything. But I've had, I mean, I'm not exaggerating, Mike. I've probably had 50 guys reach out to me privately, like through DMs and other things, and say, how do I find a therapist? How do I get help with this problem? How do I do that? And like that by itself is like like to be able to give people that. I mean, that's like the best part about all this is like, I'm giving people permission and helping them actually get the resources they need to feel better about them, feel better in the world.
Right. Have you heard of the HEAR Brotherhood? HEARE?
No, haven't.
A guy named Justin Bry is a co-founder. I'm going to have him on the podcast in a month or so. But that's kind of, I can shoot you a little bit of info on there. A couple of guys, ex-military, who are really starting up community around men, particularly men's mental health, which is pretty interesting. So I'll shoot you that when we're done.
Sounds great.
I got to ask about the sauna and the cold plunge stuff. And I know
came up. All right, we got there.
Yeah, we got there. Absolutely. So you have taken your health and longevity, and I guess health span, I'll call it, since I have I got Peter Attia's book right here.
Nice.
Very seriously, really, since kind of this period where your mother has passed, you talked about your or you haven't talked about it, but your father is in his 70s and has a dementia and some other things. But you've really taken this seriously with your family, which is really interesting.
Yep.
How did you get into this whole sauna cold plunge thing, and how did you make it? You've made it fun with your family, it seems.
Yeah. No, it's been really it's been wild. So, like a lot of the good things that have happened to me in my life or things that I've tried, I owe my wife the credit for being the person to start it. So there was a company nearby where we live here called Embrace North, and they had saunas and cold plunges like at their facility, kind of in the backyard, if you will. It was right next to the co-op. They were get our groceries. So we'd always come home from the co-op and be like, why are there saunas out there? And what's going on with the cold plunge? Like, what the heck? And my wife got invited to go one day with some friends, and she's like, sure, what the heck? My wife works out all the time, like lifts weights, is like all into it. And so she's like, yeah, I'll go and check it out. And really liked it. And then came home and like went the next day, and then went the next day, and just kept going, like bought a membership all of a sudden. It's like going. And then she's like, oh, you should come with me. And I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But then I was like, yeah, like everything, she bugs me. She tells me to do it, and I come, and I'm like, all right, it'll be fine. And it actually was great. And I felt amazing afterward. And I remember being like, wow. Like I remember went there with her, and then I had to go to a construction meeting at a project we were building. And I don't want to say I felt high, but like I was like really like, I feel really like good right now. And I remember the construction guy's like, we were having this really tense conversation, and he's like, I really would have thought you would be more upset with me right now. And I was like, I'm just feeling good. And so my wife kept going. I started going more, and we started kind of reading about it, whatever. And my wife like came to me one day. She's like, I think we should buy a sauna for the backyard. She's like, it's great. Like, it's so great to have it 6 blocks away, but like, could you imagine if we had one in our backyard? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, and we always joke, my wife is the big ideas and I'm the implementer of things. Like, we have a rock climbing wall in our backyard and a lot of things we've done in our life. She comes in and goes, I have this idea. And then I'm like, oh boy, how are we gonna pull it off? But so we ended up, I said, look, I don't know. It seems silly, but if you really want one, like, just do some research, and like, tell me what you find. And she came one day and she's like, look, I found this great one. It's like it's brand new, but like she found some sale where they were like half off. So I was like, all right, fine, buy it, whatever. And we got it. We ended up having to pay a guy to get it all set up for us and everything. And then we started using it, and I could tell a significant physical difference, like pretty shortly after using it regularly. I use it at night before I go to bed, and just I use it for half an hour. I take a warm shower upstairs, and I literally am like asleep by the time I hit my bed. It's amazing. And I've never been a great sleeper, so it's been an interesting change. And we've used it. Then of course this spring she's like, I think we need a cold plunge, and I'm like, no, we're not doing that either. And again, in her ingenuity, went to Home Depot and found a horse trough and like got it to our house. And so we use that for now. But we started doing it. And the interesting thing was, we never told our kids to do it. We never were like, hey, come do this with us. It's been a very interesting parenting lesson of like, they just saw us doing something regularly, and we're like, we want to do that too. We want to try that too. I mean, this summer one day we woke up and we were having breakfast in our kitchen. Our younger daughter was with us, and we were like, where's our older daughter? We couldn't find her. And I'm like, I'm sure we were all like, oh, I'm sure she's still asleep. And then like 5 minutes later, she comes in from the outside, and we're like in her swimsuit, and she had been in the cold plunge by herself. And she's like, oh, I just figured you guys start the day that way. I figured I'd go and get in myself. And we were just like, oh my goodness. But yeah, it's been really fun. We now have gotten to the point, we're not doing as much in the fall. It's gotten a little colder, but this summer, like we were having sauna and cold plunge parties in our backyard. Like we'd invite friends over and we'd get, muffins and croissants and coffee, and we'd all hang out in the backyard for 3 hours and alternate between the sauna and the cold plunge and just sit on our porch and talk with our friends. And it was it's been really cool. And yeah, I'm surprised that Twitter has taken to it. It was really funny the first couple of times I posted something. It wasn't, I didn't expect anything. And now those are some of my most popular posts when I talk about the saunas and stuff, which is kind of a hoot.
So what's the protocol? What's the protocol that when you are going between them? What are can you give us a quick bullets on two do's and two don'ts?
Yeah. I mean, I think so basically the research is out now that you don't want to cold plunge after you work out. You want it to be the first thing you do. So, I mean, aside from our Saturday, alternating parties, right, for the most part, our protocol is first thing in the morning, we go in the plunge. So try to stay in for 3 to 5 minutes if you can. And then normally get out. You can sometimes do a second round if you feel like it, because it basically unleashes the adrenaline and the dopamine and all those things. And it lasts for hours and hours and hours. And then usually at night, we try to sauna before bed. We get it cranked up to 180 to 200 usually. And it's 15 minutes in, usually step out for a minute or two to kind of reset, and then another 15. So, 25, 30 minutes. If you can do that 4 or 5 times a week for both, I'm not an expert at the research certainly, but there's you can Google it. I mean, the health benefits are off the charts. I mean, it lowers your risk of all cause mortality by 50%. I mean, it's crazy. And then when we're having the parties with our friends, it's usually just we go in the sauna to warm up, then we go cold plunge for 3 minutes, then we jump back in the sauna. And then that one's more fun of do it as much as you want kind of thing. Yeah. It's more of just how long can you stay in, that kind of thing. I'm not as good at plunge. It. Yeah, I joke that with my Middle Eastern blood, I'm better at the sauna because I seem to be able to withstand the heat better. I can stay in the sauna for and it's something it's interesting too. You build up, right? You build up the tolerance. When we first got it, it'd be 170 and I'd be in there for 5 minutes and I'd come out and be oh my God, I'm going to die. And now I can literally sit in there at 200 plus degrees for half an hour if I want to. But the cold plunge, I'm not as good. You'd think being from Wisconsin, I wouldn't care, but the cold plunge, I'm still I hate every single second of it. And that's an interesting part of it is it's fun when our friends are over, but it's actually really uncomfortable and it's really miserable. It's not fun at all, but it's A, lot of health benefits, but B, how good is it to start your day with something that you don't want to do and you do it anyways?
Right. It's cultivating that muscle.
Right.
It's muscle to be uncomfortable, but go anyway. I mean, if anybody wants to try to cultivate that is a great experiment. You can pick up a horse trough for $150 or something like that.
Buy some ice and you're good. Yeah. It's terrible. I hate it. I mean, I hate every second of it every time I do it. And I can't wait till it gets to the 3 minute mark so I can get out with and feel good about myself. But yeah, it's funny.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
All right, man. Thank you for going that direction with me. I learned a little bit. I've been thinking about doing something like that here and haven't pulled the trigger yet. But all right, I'm going to close this out rapid fire question style. All right. I really appreciate you being here. So just a few more, if you can hang with me. Since you're an influencer, is there another author or influencer or thought leader that's really got your attention that you've come across recently?
Yeah, there's some guys, I said earlier, I've kind of done a little bit of a deep dive into this stuff here over the last, 3 to 6 months. I'm really liking a guy named Justin Welsh who talks about being a solopreneur, about like cultivating a one-man business and not optimizing for money, but optimizing for quality of life.
Yeah.
Which I love. There's another guy you may know, Sahil Bloom.
Yep.
I've been following him quite a bit. I've actually gotten to know him a little bit, which is kind of fun. Yeah, it's that's one of the funnier things about the Twitter thing is like I actually have access to people now, which is really bizarre. Like I get DM'd from like professional athletes and guys in the NHL and like stuff like that. And I almost said to a guy once, like, dude, when I was a kid, I used to pretend to be you in the driveway. Like, it's really, I mean, you gotta keep your cool about it, but it's really been pretty fun. That piece of it's pretty funny. I mean, some of the people I've talked to, it's like, you would make your mind melt.
Very cool. So I know those two guys. Yep. I took one of Sahil's courses, met him, online a little bit. All right. What about a book you're reading now or have read recently that's really influenced you?
Yeah, I've read a couple of really good ones lately. I read Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act.
So good. I'm in the middle of it right now.
I've read it like 3 times already. And it's just all these little, 3-page, 2-page, not anecdotes, but just lessons and things he's thought of and taught, which I've really enjoyed reading that. The other book I've read recently that I thought was really great was I might be butchering the name, but The Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
So good. Yep.
Eric, what's his name? Eric Jorgensen wrote it. It's just
so good.
I mean, it's the information. I mean, and those, reading that kind of stuff, and I by no stretch of the imagination put myself in any of those categories with any of those guys, but like seeing what people like that do, like how helpful that's been to me, it's actually been really inspiring to me to want to continue to put out content and do things because, my audience is probably, younger and different, but like those guys who have they don't need to be putting out anything and they are. And like a guy like me reads it or a guy like you reads it. And we're like, this is like, maybe not life changing, but this is such good information that it's been really cool. Yeah. Both those books have blown my mind recently.
The wisdom per word in those books is outrageous. And it's just like the crystallization, I think, of lessons are just amazing. Yep. Yeah. I need to reread the Almanac of Naval. And I got to finish the Rick Rubin's book. I'm in the middle.
They're both so good. Yep.
All right. How about if you could give one piece of advice to someone just starting out, trying to get a foothold in this world, maybe they're right out of college or coming out of high school, not going to college, hitting the working world, what would that be?
Work on your mental health.
I thought you were going.
Can you read that tweet I wrote again? I mean, I think that's part of it. I think the other thing that I think helped me, and I've seen it in other people that have gone on to, enjoy what they're doing 20, 25 years later is, they weren't afraid to try a few different things. I mean, I think that's part of when I landed somewhere that felt right. Part of why I had the confidence to say, yes, this does feel right is because I had tried a few other things. I was between working in a bar and then being an actor and trying to be a lawyer and, doing some of the other stuff. Like, I really think like, I think there's a lot of people and I have friends that are like this now who, went to college, got their MBA right away, put their head down, worked at a bank for 10 years. And, 15 years later, they're a VP at the bank and they're not super happy, but they don't even know where to go or what they do because they didn't try anything else. I'm a big believer too in don't rush it. There's no award for getting there by 25 or 27. I have my probably most popular tweet that I write every, 3 to 6 months is about kind of telling my story about how, I started my company when I was 39.
Right.
Like, and I was, for all intents and purposes, mostly a failure until I was about 33 or 34. So like, you don't have to have the whole world figured out at 25. Your 20s, I wouldn't even start keeping score till you're 30. Just try a bunch of stuff, get to know yourself, figure out what you like. And, people, there's that saying, and I don't know the saying, so I'll butcher it, but like, make sure when you start climbing the ladder, you're climbing the ladder that gets you where you're trying to go. Right. Don't just start climbing ladder. Like, if you know where you want to go, like, be the receptionist if you know that's the first step to go up the ladder, but make sure it's the right ladder.
Right. Make sure it's not leaning against the wrong wall.
Right.
I think is exactly the saying. Yeah, I agree with that. And it just really speaks to
the importance and maybe the missing element for a lot of people, that how to explore early on, like how to figure out, is there a path or process that you can, guardrails that you can put around this exploration process to feel more confident that you're going to find the right wall. And that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm trying to work on with people and coaching and in building some of the courses that I'm doing is how do we build that infrastructure to help people explore earlier. Very good. I love that advice. All right. What's got you excited about the next 12 months? So we got a lot of negativity in the world, a lot of bickering, yelling at people. What's got you really excited and optimistic about the next 12 months?
So, I mean, on a personal note, I think for me, I was saying, I don't know how much real estate will get done in the next year or so, but taking the time to kind of learn about media and really diving into this stuff, kind of beginner's mind again. And despite being uncomfortable a bunch, it's actually pretty fun, and I'm learning a lot, and I think I'm going to spend a lot of time on that probably over the next year, really trying to get smarter and get better at it, and with the goal to try to affect more people and try to help more people do good things and be an example and all of that. So I think for me personally, and just kind of in general, I think I'm not looking forward to election season or any of those types of things. I'm looking forward to continuing to live my life and do my stuff and look at the media.
So kind of within that vein, talk to us about where people can find you online, or what you're specifically talking about with the newsletter, where they can find that, what they're going to learn. Send us out with a little bit of where they can get more access to.
Sure. Little final self promotion here at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'm on Twitter, Sean D. Sweeney. You should be able to find me on there. That's where that's the majority of my online content is on Twitter. I'm part of a real estate community on there and a bunch of other stuff. So that's where I do a lot of stuff. In my bio on Twitter, there's a link to a little thing called Linktree where you can see some of the other stuff I'm working on too. I've actually set up a consulting calendar where, at first when this stuff started happening, I was taking everybody's call and all that. And then I realized it's become a full-time job. I can't actually do that. So, for people who are super interested in real estate or development or want some of my time, I broke it up into 15 and 30 minute and hour long stuff. You can buy a tiny little piece of my time, and I'm happy to, it's underpriced. I mean, it's not the value of my hour or half hour, but it's underpriced, but it's kind of win-win. It makes me feel like, okay, I'm, because I'm at the point where I'm I'd rather play with my kids than have you pick my brain for half an hour.
Yeah,
so, if you want to do it, if it's helpful, pay me a little bit and I'll help you out. So I've got that, and my newsletter is called The Bright Build. It's new. It's just we're only 3 weeks into it, and that's on Substack, and it's just Sean D. Sweeney .substack.com, and you can find that. And I'm talking a lot about real estate. I mean, it's Mike, a lot about what we talked about. I mean, and there'll be a lot of technical real estate stuff because I want to help people in that way, but a lot of it is what we talked about today with mindset and mental health and I'm trying to tell some stories about myself, like we did to give permission and set the example and show people look, it can turn out okay. It does not every step of the way feels that way, but, so that, if people want to subscribe to that, I've been just overwhelmed. I mean, I think I have 2,400 subscribers after putting it out for 2 or 3 weeks. So it's it's been really, really cool. So we're going to spend a bunch more time on that and make that, I think there's a space for, a lot of real estate content gets really bad. People just don't like it because it's a lot of people selling courses and selling the dream, and it's a lot of fluff. Mm-hmm. And I've come to realize, I think there's really a white space in the content world for kind of a real estate person who, isn't a guru, is just a practitioner who's just telling stories and doing stuff, kind of being an honest, an honest person you can look at and want to emulate and do. So we're going to spend some time trying to maybe fill that space over the next year and see if people are attracted to it. If not, we won't do it. But again, it's testing, right? It's putting some stuff out there and seeing what resonates with people. And If it's helpful, we'll do more of it. If it's not, we won't. I say in my newsletter or some of the intros, like, tell me what you want me to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Send me a note. Tell me what you want to hear about. Like, tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. I'm doing this to kind of try to put education and helpful stuff out there.
I'd say your inclination around the white space is probably on, since you've accidentally grown the following that you already have by just being you and being able to be your authentic self. So I love that. I'm going to go to Substack and subscribe right away. I haven't yet, but I know it's just brand new because I want to follow your journey and I want to hear more about how Sean's going to reinvent himself into his 50s.
Well, we know it's going to happen. So
for sure. Sean, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being here, man. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it. I know my audience is going to get a lot of value from it.
Awesome. Well, I hope so. I appreciate you having me. And it's been absolutely great to reconnect.